Well, thank you so much, Val. It's a pleasure to see you. Some of you may be thinking I look familiar, but you're not quite sure. This is my first presentation ever with a beard, and sometimes I surprise myself when I look in the mirror, so I'm still getting used to it, and maybe you are as well. I got a call from someone who's probably known to many of you in this room named Susan Yurkovich in 1993. And Susan asked me if I would get involved in doing a project to help the Canadian Pulp and Paper Association, which is the forerunner for the Forest Products Association of Canada. And I jumped into that project. It was a great learning experience. And it, of course, has turned into an almost 30-year love affair with learning about how Canadians relate to the resource sectors in our country, to the opportunities that they provide, to some of the challenges that go along with being a resource-rich country. And so I jumped at the chance to work on this project with Val and Sarah and the rest of the team that's involved here. And thank you for inviting us to be part of this important work. Let me declare at the outset that I'm an unabashed believer that Canada can have and BC can have strong sectors that are resource-based, as well as other strong functioning and growing parts of the economy, and that as the world demands more resources, needs more resources, the search is on for places that can be trusted to responsibly produce those resources. And so I am a big believer that even if there are headwinds right now, there are huge opportunities that lie ahead because of the values that we hold dear. So let me walk you through the data that we gathered as part of this important project. Val mentioned the Mindreader program that the BC Chamber has set up. I've worked with a lot of organizations over the years, and I can tell you that in my experience, this is the single best example of an organization putting in place a robust platform to tap into the sentiments of business on a regular basis and to be able to draw from people in the business community, small, medium, and large, different parts of the province, some really important insights on the topics of the day. You can see the time frame for this survey. This is relatively fresh data, and people participated online. So we're very happy with the process and the methodology and the reliability of the data. The first thing that's important to note is that the people who answered this survey were almost unanimously of the view that natural resources is important for the economy of the province, including 55% who would characterize it as a crucial part of the economy of the province. So again, whatever headwinds people might see, there's no doubt in these folks' minds, and I've done enough polling with the general public as well to tell you that is the case with the general public in British Columbia too. 86% of this sample said a strong resource sector creates a base on which to grow other parts of the economy. Again, these folks are not seeing this as an either-or situation, but because we have a strong resource base and the potential to build on that, we also have opportunities to create other strong functioning and growing areas of new economic opportunity. 81% say that the revenues from resources allow BC to pay for programs like health and education. And 3 out of 4 say they want to see the BC government do more to encourage investment in BC natural resources. So right off the top, you're seeing people saying, these are sectors that we value. We understand the economic and the revenue relationship, and we believe that we need to do more to secure the investment that will keep these sectors thriving into the future. Many recognize, as you'll see in the data that I'm about to show you, the current challenges in forestry and mining, but they hope to see these sectors recover in the future. The fact that things are not going as well as they perhaps could be or had been doesn't mean that people want to see the province give up on these sectors. Quite the contrary. They're looking forward to a turnaround, and they believe that there is the wherewithal and the opportunity that lies ahead. The desire really is expressed, I think, best as a hope that the BC economy thrives on multiple cylinders, multiple economic areas of growth, recognizing that the global economy is changing and that there are opportunities for British Columbians in many of the new sectors that are emerging around the world. When we asked people how they saw the current health of different sectors of the economy, 74% characterized tourism and hospitality as excellent good. That's at the top of the list. Another 20% said fair. Film and TV, you can see high technology, renewable energy, agriculture. Those are the ones at the top of the list. And down towards the bottom, you do see significant numbers of people saying that mining is not having a good time right now and forestry is not having a good time right now. And I want to underscore one thing, which is that people thinking that a sector is having a difficulty is not the same as them saying they have a negative view of that sector. We recently did a survey for COFI of public opinion in the province. 79% have a positive view of the mining sector, 76% of the forestry sector, and 76% of the mining sector. So this is really people saying we think that there's a challenge right now with respect to the economic health of these sectors. We then went on to ask people what they thought the importance of these sectors would look like in the future. Would they become more important 10 years from now, about the same, or less important? And you can see right up at the top, the idea that renewable energy will become more important for BC in the future is right up at the very top of the list. High technology, energy more generally, agriculture, natural gas, LNG. These are all areas where people are seeing growth. But if you look at mining and forest products, not very many people are expecting those to decline in importance. It's almost as though this sample is mostly saying stability, maybe some growth, but no further decline. And of course, that's what they're predicting might happen. It's not necessarily what they want to happen, which I'll show you in a moment. The confidence that people express in the outlook 10 years for these different sectors follows this pattern, with mining and forest products showing the highest degree of current pessimism, and tourism, hospitality, high technology, film and TV, and renewable energy at the other end of the spectrum. So this is essentially people saying, based on the facts that I see today, based on the headwinds that I see today, the context that exists right now, this is what it looks like might happen. However, what do people want to have happen is a separate thing sometimes. And when we asked about the preferred future of these sectors, what you can see is that with no exceptions, significantly more people say that they wanted to see things get bigger rather than get smaller. That's true as well for mining and for forest products. And right up at the top of the list, of course, renewable energy. Natural resources more generally, 64% say we want this to become more important in the economy of British Columbia 10 years from now. Only 13% say that they want it to become less important. So from my standpoint, well, sometimes it's possible to look at headlines, to hear protests, to sense friction. It's easy to sometimes come to the conclusion that there are too many people arguing against the resources sector. But whether it's public opinion or this business leadership survey work that we do, I find that generally the rule of thumb where 15% have an extreme opinion on one end and 15% have an extreme opinion on the other end, but 70% are in the middle saying, I want forward progress, I want to solve problems, I want to create growth, not turn backward. And that's the sentiment that we see throughout this survey on the resources sector, and then some. Because when we turn the conversation to, well, where will the world go to get the resource products with the assurances that people are looking for, the assurances that investors and major customers are looking for, all of a sudden the switch goes off differently and people stop thinking about what the current headwinds are and they start thinking and imagining about what the opportunity is that lies ahead, especially for a place like British Columbia. People think resources in British Columbia, and they think well-paying jobs rather than poor-paying jobs, interesting rather than boring, pride rather than embarrassment, skilled and professional work rather than manual labor, environmentally thoughtful. All of these are indications of a positive feeling about the resources sectors in British Columbia right now. And they're all part of what it goes into people saying, there are headwinds today, but we should be able to solve these problems and find more opportunity in the future. To the extent that we can look at this data and say, well, what are some of the things where people think industry can do a better job? Those numbers on the red side down near the bottom, what's the relationship with the climate change issue? Are these sectors technologically refreshing themselves as much as they need to? Are they a little bit more old-fashioned and not quite innovative enough? Are they seeing declining opportunities rather than finding growing opportunities? So those are some challenges within the sector sometimes where people are saying, I don't know. I think there's more that we can do inside the sector. However, many of the challenges that people see facing the resources sector today aren't really made within the sector. They are brought to the sector by external forces, and it's not people saying that those are illegitimate, but they are not things that industry alone can solve in some instances. Most want to see the natural resources sectors, as I say, become more important, but they see a lot of different headwinds today, including pressure groups, taxes, regulations, labor costs and availability, and climate change. The world sometimes wants to find, well, what's the one problem? What's the single biggest problem? What's the one thing that if we were able to fix it or change it, that we could unlock all kinds of opportunity and sweep away a lot of barriers? Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that in this particular instance. When we ask people whether these conditions in the province right now are challenging or not challenging in terms of the opportunity and the success of the resources sector, regulation 79% said challenging, pressure group 77%, climate change 76%, labor cost 71%. You can see these numbers are telling us a story of all of the above. Essentially, people saying it is not maybe a perfect storm, but it's a pretty difficult set of conditions that we exist with right now, some of which can be solved by individual companies and entrepreneurship and innovation, but some of which require public policy support, some of which require maybe a change in the way that society relates to the sector, and sometimes that's a question of communication and willpower and good faith. But it's a lot of different things right now. Large majorities, though, are convinced that BC can be a world leader in providing sustainably produced, low-carbon resource products. And 25 years ago, if you tested this proposition with people, they might say, well, yeah, maybe we could do that, but I don't even know what that is. I remember the very first time I tried to test the idea of using wood instead of steel studs because of the carbon implications of stick frame building. And a lot of people said, well, now that you've talked to me about it for an hour, I get it. But if you hadn't talked to me about it for that hour, I wouldn't have understood anything that you were saying. 25 years later, this is an entirely different set of opportunities. It's not all mature yet, but Val and I were talking about the challenge sometimes to look at a trend and to say, if we can't defeat that trend, if we don't believe that trend is going away, we need to find a way to make the trend our friend. And I see so much opportunity for the resource sectors in British Columbia in that area. What's needed to improve the resources sector? Promote innovation, find and build markets for the most sustainable products made anywhere in the world, work to attract and retain the greatest workers in the world, promote BC's products as sustainable and low carbon, streamline regulations, and make sure that taxes are competitive. What I find interesting about this list is it's never surprising for me when a business survey finds business people saying streamline regulations and reduce taxes. That's a normal and healthy friction, I think, that exists within society. But in addition to those things, people are identifying some new factors that relate to opportunity that wouldn't have been there before, and really signal that there is an instinct to say, we can make the trends our friend. We can find opportunities that are emerging around the world. We need to get maybe a bit more focused on that and find the dynamism to get through the kind of the current headwinds and to see that opportunity clearly. But it's there. 78% say they'd like to see BC better promote its low-carbon advantage globally. Large majorities say BC can be a global leader in low-carbon energy, in low-carbon wood products, in bio-based energy products, and in low-carbon minerals and metals. Again, this is not a frame that many people would have thought of 10 years ago, but whether they're looking at how investors are relating to the resource marketplace, whether they're looking at how geopolitics is changing and the interest in critical minerals and making sure that it isn't just one country in the world that dominates the market of critical minerals. I find in my conversations every week, I'm hearing something new that suggests emerging opportunity because of the geopolitical forces and the climate change issue and the emerging interest of SRG investors, especially some of the largest hedge funds in the world. looking for ways to place bets on companies that will embrace these trends, these needs, these expectations, and create solutions for them. Renewable energy is another area where people don't necessarily know the bounty that this province has or the opportunity that the renewable energy from British Columbia can create. However, 72% of this sample say, we think we're going to need to develop more to match the growth and demand that we can expect. That's simply people saying, everywhere I go, I hear people saying, I want renewable energy. They don't know how much there is here, but they know that the demand is likely to continue to grow. And should we increase opportunities to export in renewable energy outside the province, provided there's enough to meet our needs first? You can see how the numbers fall here. Most people say, I'd like to see this happen. 10 years ago, when I measured this, there was still so much lingering frustration with export deals with California that people were not sure that this was a road that they wanted to go down. But today, in the context of BC as a renewable, sustainable, low-carbon product leader in the world, people are open to all kinds of conversations that perhaps didn't seem so easy to have before. So let me wrap up. The respondents in this survey told us that they believe that the resources sector in this province represent a vital part of the economy, a part of the economy that they want to see remain vital in the future. There's a sense of opportunity to grow, a desire to draw more investment to fuel that growth, but some doubts about whether or not the province is going to be able to realize that opportunity. They see a lot of headwinds, and sometimes I think it's easy for people to feel like there are too many headwinds. They're coming at us too hard, too long. Are we ever going to be able to solve them? Pressure groups, regulatory burden, taxes, and labor are among the most prominent, but you saw the list, it's a pretty long list. However, most people do believe that these problems aren't insurmountable, that they aren't problems that we can't solve. They believe that we can and should solve them, and that BC products can find even greater success in the future because they understand that basic math, that the world needs resource products, and it's going to be looking for those products to be delivered increasingly with a degree of environmental and social responsibility assurance that not every place in the world can match BC for. In effect, and in summation, I think that people are telling us that they're looking for a collective effort to make investment here more attractive, to stimulate innovation, to build new markets, and put the BC brand forward as a sustainable product leader. Thank you again for the opportunity to share this data with you. And Val, I know you were going to ask people if they had any questions, and you may have one or two. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. That was terrific, and we're going to do a fast and furious speed round here. And folks, just to remind you, pigeonhole.at on your mobile device, and the code is Paper Excellence, all uppercase. So please get social with us, and I know we're going to put some of the questions up on the screen. Bruce, one of the things that struck me with the results this year is there is a great sense of pride. As you said, people associate the resource sectors with well-paying jobs. One of the slides we didn't show on this, but will be available online tomorrow, is that I think it was 65% of people responding to the survey want their kids to work in these sectors, and yet some of the challenges are causing them to be maybe a little less bullish about the future. What is ultimately driving this dissonance, and how do we compare to other markets in Canada? Is this unique to BC? BC. It's not exactly unique to BC, and different sectors in the resources sector have slightly different challenges in my view. We have measured that in surveys, separate surveys, and what we find is that for some people, the idea of living somewhere more remote in a less hospitable climate than they're used to is an inherent barrier. But the bigger barriers are typically not knowing whether or not the sector is going to have a long-term future. And of course, as long as people see these sectors as having these kind of cycles, deep downturns and then steep rises, there's a hesitancy about seeing their kids go into those sectors. So I find that there's a tentative quality to
we should have our kids go into these sectors, in part because they're not sure that it'll ever be as stable as they would like it to be for their kids. And that's where I think part of the message of the opportunity for the future that I was talking about can really help.
So tell you what, because we've only got a couple of minutes here, I want to go straight to some of the questions we see here. 15 votes in first place. Curious as to why you didn't include questions on Indigenous support or challenges in your survey, particularly in light of BC's adoption of the principles of UNDRIP. Can you comment?
We did include 1 or 2 questions in this survey that had to do with that, but in the interest of compressing the presentation a little bit tonight, didn't talk about them. I certainly have done a fair bit of work on this, and I would say that among the most important reasons why some people hesitate to feel really good about the resource sectors are the climate change issue. What's the relationship with climate change? Is there more friction or more opportunity for Indigenous people? That's an absolutely central one. The third really is the future of the industry. And those are all kind of linked together in my view, because I think that what people have come to understand in BC especially, but in other places as well, which is that unless you can solve for the need to work together with Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities, you're not going to be able to succeed for the long term. And that's certainly what we saw in this survey too.
Great. Thank you for that, Bruce. This is a terrific question, and I know we'd love to speak to this one. What should people be doing with this data? Is there a call to action? And I know when I was on the podium, I talked about the opportunity to lead into the narrative that we've been telling, but the opportunity to nuance it maybe moving forward. So you had some interesting slides in there. What should we take away from this presentation tonight?
I think that there's a few things. I definitely think that there's a public policy piece and there's a communication piece. And there's probably a re-engineering piece for some businesses, depending on the sector and what they're involved in. But the thing that I find the hardest is that if you're in an industry that's faced a lot of pressure, a lot of criticism, you're very acutely aware of it, and it's easy to get drawn into constantly responding to that. These numbers are telling me what all of my other survey data is telling me, which is that most people understand the current friction. They want to know where we're going to go. What does the moonshot look like? What is the opportunity set that we're going to pursue? The idea that Canada and the United States have entered into a critical minerals task force, not very many people will have heard about that. But that's a pretty interesting dynamic that's going on. The amount of investor movement that's going on around responsible companies, companies with purpose, those are all trends that, in my view, should be friendly trends for people in this province, for people in the resource sector in this province. So I would take this data and say, what does that moonshot look like? What is the North Star that we're going to describe for people that will motivate them and rally them to that? Understanding that there's always going to be friction along the way, and that's healthy, but it's better than talking about today's issues or yesterday's issues.
Great. Moderator privilege here, tied for first. Actually, now it's in first place, because I think this is important. We had a great sample this year in the inaugural survey. What was the regional makeup of respondents? What industries did they represent?
It was a remarkable cross-section, and in the report that you guys and C3, I think, have published, there's a fair bit of detail about the sample. Regionally, across the province, a pretty good cross-section. We even looked at whether people put themselves on the right or the left or the center of the spectrum. They actually look pretty reflective of the province as a whole. And there were certainly, as I think you may have mentioned, half of the people in our sample worked or knew somebody who worked directly in the resources sector. The other half did not. So a pretty good cross-section. And we certainly had representation from the mining sector and the forestry and the oil and gas sector as well.
So I tell you what, why don't we do one last question here, because I think we have to get on with the program. But Bruce, you have such a beautiful national perspective on these types of conversations, and you might have had some insight into other jurisdictions around Canada. But top question here, can you name one action to stimulate innovation? So within the BC context, with what you're seeing on the national stage?
Well, it's such a great question. The thing that I get the most worried about when it comes to the resource sectors is the weaponization of resource sector issues for political purposes. And so really the single best thing that I think can happen is for people who care about the sectors in politics, in government, and in those sectors is to try to dial down the rhetoric sometime and to just say, what are we going to try to do together and how are we going to get it done together? Because most people, that's what they want to have happen. They don't want the high-pitched battle. They don't want the rhetoric all the time. They don't want everything to be a shooting match between the far left and the far right. All of that, they think, gets in the way of looking at the world and saying, rather than through the lens of, hasn't it been awkward and uncomfortable to have 25 years of, or more, of protests about forestry and a lot of protests over the years about mining, instead to look at the world that lies ahead and know that the demand for responsibly sourced resource products is growing exponentially and is only going to continue to grow exponentially. So it's find that trend and make it your friend.
Thank you for that conversation, Bruce. I know that was fast, but it was a pleasure to share a microphone with you tonight. There was one last question there, and I should mention it. The data is all available on the BC Chamber website, and I imagine it's probably not too complicated for us to send out an email to all the attendees. We'll make sure you get linked to this data, and it's yours to work with and share. So I hope it will inform our conversations over the next couple of days. And thank you, Bruce. Please join me in thanking Bruce Anderson and Abacus Data.